Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me for yet another amazing conversation with two really dear friends of mine. This is Zoe and Andy Clark-Coates. Really nice to see you guys. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, great to be on.
Zoe and Andy have been at Spring Harvest. I'm sure if you've been at Spring Harvest the last few years, you will have seen Zoe and Andy delivering their seminars on grief. So, Zoe, I was thinking earlier, if this was Mastermind, your chosen subject would be grief. And that's a really interesting subject to be passionate about. Talk to me about where that came from, where that passion came from.
Yeah, I think it came from witnessing people who were going through the real valley of grief and seeing how hopeless it can make people feel. And knowing through my counselling training and therapy training that this is a subject that people feel really taboo about talking about, and they feel uncomfortable. And those two things together really made me very interested in it, because actually the mechanism to progress through grief better, if there's any such processes going through grief well, I think that in itself is a whole topic, isn't it? Because it's so unique. But we really need to be able to talk about what we're going through when we are grieving to be able to get to the other side, which isn't being with no pain, because grief is a lifelong journey, but actually to get to a place where we can find joy again, and we can find hope again, and we can plan for a future again. The way we get there is through talking and through allowing our brain to come to terms with that loss. But yet society says, don't talk about this subject. So that's why it's really interesting to me, because the mechanism for healing is actually removed from many people, because they're told not to speak about it and to go home, hide away, come back better, when actually we're making people suffer for so much longer by encouraging that way of processing.
That's so true. I mean, I remember personally when, I went through a challenging time in my early 40s. I know I don't look, obviously, I don't look old enough. In my early 40s, I went through a very challenging time. And the people sort of nearest and dearest to me, and even my church community at the time, felt it was right to give me space. And I didn't see anyone really for about 3 months, bar a couple of people who camped outside my house praying for me, not knocking the door so much, but still there and present. But actually a lot of people just said, oh, we want to give you space. And I remember at the time feeling incredibly lonely, and that it was exactly the opposite of what I wanted and what I needed, I think, at the time. So Andy and Zoe, you are directors of a global charity called Mariposa International.
Yeah, so it began around 13 years ago now, and it was born out of our personal experience and journey of grief and loss. So we sadly lost 5 babies while trying to have a family, and have got 2 wonderful daughters, but we lost 3 before having our first daughter, and then another 2 before having our second daughter. And sort of came through that experience and knew that the care and support of people who went through baby loss was sadly lacking. Our consultant even said to us, don't even bother going looking for support because it's so bad. And for us, that was really hard to understand, because we saw the stats. We saw that 1 in 4 pregnancies are lost. Around 258,000 will be lost each year in the UK. And so how can that many people go through loss and the support not be amazing? And so we thought we could do something about this. So we set up initially a thing called the Saying Goodbye Services of Remembrance. And so these were services at cathedrals, beautiful moving events for people to come along and formally acknowledge and remember the babies they'd lost. And the Guardian newspaper ran an article on the fact that we were doing this. And pretty much overnight, it exploded into one service became 7 services. The story was told around the world, and we were suddenly having tens, then hundreds, then thousands of people contacting us saying, could you support us? Could you help us? I've gone through this. I've experienced this. What sort of can you help us? And so we knew we had to do something. And so We set up the organisation initially as part of our business. We'd got a global events business, and we set it up as a division. And very quickly we realised it had to be its own standalone charity. And so it became initially the Mariposa Trust, and it then became global. And so it became Mariposa International as of last year. And we support around 50,000 people a week globally who are going through baby loss. And so whether that be loss during pregnancy, at birth, or in early years, whether the loss be recent or historic. So we support people who lost babies weeks ago or even days ago, but also people who lost 50, 60, 70 years ago, who are still on that journey of grieving for loss.
So initially it was just a support organisation, and then we quickly realised we needed to start campaigning to make things better for people who were suffering. That we were hearing daily stories from people who were really traumatised through poor care, and we realised we had the power as an organisation to actually try and make some of that trauma be eliminated from people's stories by changing how people are getting offered care and changing clinical practices as well. And so we launched a campaigning arm of the organisation, and that really quickly grew as well. So today we're supporting thousands of people around the world, but we're also at the forefront of shouting for change and being part of policy change.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more, because I want our listeners to hear about your work with the government, if you would be willing to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So how many years ago did we become stakeholders within the Department?
Maybe probably coming up to about 10 years ago.
Yeah, right. and that really changed things for us in the fact that we started to be invited around the table when major things were needing to be changed in this area. And then when Jeremy Hunt was the health secretary, a story got brought to his attention of a family who had suffered really poor treatment in a hospital. And he said, we need to do something about this. And he decided to launch the first inquiry review of its kind to completely look at everything to do with baby loss pre-24 weeks. And it was going to be like nothing the country had ever seen, in the fact that nothing was off the table. We could just look at absolutely everything, at the clinical practice and the compassion that's been offered, and really identify things that needed to be changed. And we were so excited when we saw it on the news that this was being called for, and we're very hopeful that we would be asked to be one of the voices around the table. And then one Saturday afternoon, I received a direct message on Twitter, actually, to say you're about to get a call up for government. And I was like, what does that even mean? And is that really going to happen? Within an hour or so, I received an email asking me to go to London the following week. And I was asked whether I would not only co-chair the complete piece of work, also author it. And it was a mighty shock to the system to be asked to steer the ship that I thought we would just be one of the people on it, but also a privilege. Yeah. Overwhelming in the fact that we already work such long hours. How on earth was I going to be able to give it this time to the government? But we were reassured that it was going to be 1 day a week for 6 months. I was like, we can fit that in. 5.5 years later, I had to accept that, they hadn't been truly honest about the length and breadth of the work. But it was such a privilege to steer that ship and to be able to follow staff in hospitals, to meet with thousands of families. The shadowing of staff it was such a privilege. I can't even underestimate or say what that really meant to the work, because it was so valuable. Yeah, it was. And I got to go in and shadow doctors into theatre and watch operations and going into A&E and recovery and I
think also asking those questions of what do you want?
Yeah. What do you think needs changing? And people were so open with me, and I'd be sitting in staff rooms across the country with the staff, and they'd go, I don't even know why we're telling you this, but I just feel you need to know it.
Yeah.
And it just felt like that was God on those moments, because it drew out so much truth and also scandal. I have to say it did. It showed practices that were happening that had previously been hidden by lots of paperwork. And they said, look, we totally trust you with this information. And they knew I wasn't out there to bring shame on anybody. I was out there to expose what needed to be exposed.
Yeah.
And to make things better, not only for future generations, but for this generation.
Yeah.
And so it meant that we were able to really dive into the truth and make this piece of work something that will change history, I like to think, in the fact of the care that people are offered. It resulted in 73 national recommendations to completely overhaul many areas within the NHS and beyond. So we looked at everything from 999 to 111 to every GP practice in Britain, to workplace regulations and laws, to the education system. What are we educating young people on grief and loss and fertility and infertility? And there was nothing that we didn't look at. And all of those changes have now come into being. But one of the things that we'd started before I was appointed was we'd launched a new campaign for a certificate of life.
Yes, great. Let's get into this.
Yeah, it was something we were really passionate about because of supporting the volume of people we're supporting. We're hearing thousands of stories a week from people about what they went through, but also the things that caused the most significant long-term trauma outside of obviously the loss. Sadly, a lot of loss we can't prevent, but a lot of the other things we can. And we were hearing time and time again from families that the thing that they felt that they would never be able to get over was that their babies didn't get any formal legal recognition, no government acknowledgement at all. We were like, surely that's something we can do to make a difference. So I went on to BBC Breakfast. I'm a regular on there talking about grief and loss, and shared what our heart was to do. And Baroness Floella Benjamin saw me on the TV and asked if I'd go into the Lords to meet with her. And she said, I love your campaign. I love what you're doing. Can I lend my voice to it? I'm like, absolutely. So she joined the campaign, and that helped it pick up momentum. And then we decided to not only push this going through Parliament, but we could also, with her help, push it going through the House of Lords. It quickly went through and had its readings and had a unanimous approval from the House of Lords. People were just totally for it. But then I was recruited to this government post, and Jeremy Hunt knew that we were leading this campaign and said, I'm totally fine with you making that part of the review. So we were like, amazing. So we had it going through the House of Lords, and then we also had it going through the review. And what that meant was I had the privilege to not only be the campaigner behind all of the work, I also then had the opportunity within government to show how it could be rolled out. So I was asked to look what departments could make it work. I got asked to help make the actual certificate. What should it look like? What wording should we put on? And so it was such a unique position, because not many people who campaign for something are also given them the ability to implement it and to roll it out and to create what it looks like. And that meant we were able to use all of these millions of families of stories who are saying, this is what I need, this is what I want, and actually make that exactly happen with what they wanted. So it was an amazing gift, and it got rolled out initially in
February of 2024, and then fully in October, November of 2024. And so that now means that anybody who has lost a baby pre-24 weeks is able to get a certificate acknowledging and remembering their baby.
That's incredible.
But not just people who lose now, they are completely retrospective. So if you lost a baby 50, 60, 70 years ago, you can also make the application.
And you don't need evidence. Again, this was something we were really passionate about. the majority of loss actually happens in people's homes. Very few losses actually go through a hospital. And so it's really important that this could be done on a trust basis and not people have to supply evidence. Otherwise, very few people would be able to apply for one. Yeah. So all you need to do is go onto the government website, search certificates of loss or certificates of life, and those certificate link will come up and you can make an application. And you can even apply if a partner or the person who's carried the child is deceased or the spouse is deceased. There's mechanisms to still be able to get both parties on the certificate. So we really have considered everything with them. But tens of thousands of people now have these in their homes, and hearing the stories of how it's made a difference to their grieving journey has been really useful.
It's absolutely remarkable, and it really, for me, God absolutely laid out the red carpet in a way for you, didn't he? He called you, parted the waters, got everything else out of the way, and just went right, off you go, and you've been able to see that through to completion. And but who knows what's coming? You know, who knows where you're going to go next with that? And I know that there will be, as you say, tens of thousands of women and families that will be grateful for the work that you've done. It's really evident that you guys love people. You have a love and an absolute gut desire to see people healed and to have that permission to be heard, and that's just absolutely beautiful. You're both Christians, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I know, as you said, you've got two wonderful daughters who are part of your ministry, aren't they, as well? Which is really, which is beautiful. I would love to just talk a little bit about the separate organisation that you've got, which specifically works with churches, because I think it would be really interesting for us as a church, as a body, to think about how do we respond to grief? Because in a way, as a Christian organisation, as a church, followers of Christ, we should be theoretically really good at this, right? Because the main commandment of love the Lord your God, love your neighbour as yourself, etc. Love should be, and compassion and acceptance should be something that's really easy, but actually, it's not, is it? Talk to me about Soul Tears.
Yeah, well, Soul Tears we set up because the charity Mariposa International, or Saying Goodbye, that's predominantly how we know, because that's our support division, is very much a secular organisation. But as Christians, we were being asked to speak at a lot of events, but also do a lot of church events in training people, helping them equip their congregation how to support the bereaved within their community. And we really have a passion for that. Yeah. And because we can't do that through Saying Goodbye, Mariposa International, we decided to set up a separate small organisation, a small not-for-profit, which was called Soul Tears. And Soul Tears has got a focus that we come at it from a very Christian angle. Yeah. So instead of just talking about the psychological process of the grieving process, we can actually bring in faith. We can talk about godly principles and what God has said about grieving and how we should support one another and how he is closest to the brokenhearted. And what does that mean in a practical way for us as a community? And Soul Tears has enabled us to go into many churches in this country and around the world in helping equip and helping train, because for so many organisations, they don't know how to tackle this subject. And just like it's a taboo in the world, it often can become taboo in a Christian and a church setting. That means they end up leaving their church. Sometimes are very resentful of God because the things that they're told when they've gone through a heartbreaking loss is, well, that was God's will. Or why are you feeling sad because the Bible tells us that even in grief, we should be happy and full of hope. And so they end up feeling shame for feeling the weight of pain and sadness and sometimes depression that they're carrying. And actually, I think with a bit of education on this subject, we can change how people feel in a Christian setting about this subject, and we can make people not feel afraid, and we can empower leadership to show up well, because there's always a tendency, if this is a subject that makes you nervous, to back off it and to say, come back when you're feeling well, come back when you're feeling great again, when actually we need to be encouraging people to bring their pain to church and to sit on that pew and feel free to shed millions of tears, and that be okay.
I think because grief is such a unique experience to each individual, if you've got leadership within a church, for instance, who've had a really bad experience of grief,
or no experience,
they may really struggle in knowing how to care for somebody who's actually going through it, and how to care for them well. And it's not a matter of trying to shame people or criticize people in what they've done, but it's trying to allow people to understand that actually it's actually really simple to be able to actually help people. There's some really simple things you can put in place. And so that's what we try to teach with churches. That's what we try to help with teams and also congregations, because actually this isn't something just for a leadership team or a pastoral team. This is something that each of us have an ability to do, to actually walk alongside people and really help them in their grieving process. I think lots of us almost have this quite scared view of grief, that actually if we get too involved, could it happen to us, or how are we going to be affected by it?
So what if we say the wrong thing? Make it worse. And so all of that makes people back off. But actually, we're created as humans to grieve, and our bodies are wired to move us through the grieving process. That there's some beautiful facts about grief. For instance, tears of grief and sadness are completely different to tears of joy and happiness. That tears of grief contain hormones and chemicals, and they are meant to be shed. And by not allowing them to be shed, they can have a physical impact on our health. There's a saying that if you don't allow yourself to weep, your internal organs will weep instead. We are biologically wired, when we are grieving, to allow those tears to fall. And if we suppress them, they have a complete knock-on effect on our physical and mental health. The other thing is, tears of grief are a different substance, so they cling to the face longer so they can be witnessed, because we are meant to see one another and be able to reach out to support those who are grieving. And when we encourage people to grieve in isolation and away from community, they don't have that opportunity to get that support that we need.
We're robbing them
of that opportunity.
And grieving is a community. There's the whole thing about as a village, as a community, you get together in that grief, and that's part of the acknowledgement and the understanding of grief.
And God created that. We created in the image of God, and so why do we feel so bad when we are grieving? Why do we feel so rushed to get to the point of the other side of that valley? And part of that's human, because we don't want to stay in a place of suffering for a long period of time, because it's uncomfortable, it's painful, it's agonizing. So of course we want to move quickly through it, but also by delaying that and by slowly navigating it, we actually get to the other side a much wholer human than just trying to build a bridge to go over the top of it. And so sometimes we need to go at the speed our grief dictates, rather than community around us trying to rush us to the other side.
I think I'm guilty of. I know I'm guilty of that myself. I mean, I'm a fixer, so when I see my friends, family unhappy, I mean, we've had this conversation before. This is not news to you. Immediately, I just want to make them feel better. I don't want to see them sad because, as an empath, it hurts me when I see others hurting. So my instinct is to fix. And you've given me quite a lot of guidance in the last couple of years to help me through that situation, and actually I've seen a real difference in how I approach it, so thank you from me. But also I think there are probably more people like me in the world that do struggle to see others grieving and do want to rush through to get to that place where people feel better. So I do think there's things we need to learn. Now, you're coming to Spring Harvest this year. Yes. And we're so grateful that you're coming again because you've got so much to share. So there will be a lot of people watching this now that are coming. So I would urge you to go and see Zoe and Andy when they're on site. They're going to be on site, both sites, Skegness and Minehead, on Wednesday afternoon, delivering their seminars. Please go and see them and learn from these amazing people. But for those that maybe this year can't get there, could you just, and this is probably quite hard, but could you summarize maybe three things for people that can't come to Spring Harvest this year that we can take away, that when we are faced with somebody, friend or family, that's clearly grieving, what are the things that we can do? What are the steps we can take?
Yeah. Well, first of all, be honest about, if you're the person who is grieving, be honest about it. And be as open as you can be. That doesn't mean you need to be posting all over social media of what you're going through. The information you hold about yourself and your family and friends is valuable. Yeah. And so it's okay if you want to be more selective who you share with, but it's important to share it. It's important to find trusted people that you can share what you're going through with. That way you're giving people the opportunity to offer you that hand to support. And we all need that. However independent we are, we need those to journey alongside us. So be honest about what you're going through. And if you're in a position where you don't have family or friends that you can turn to, or a church community, you can turn to charities like ours, where we have got a team who is always available to work with you, to help you process that grief, but also to walk with you through the grieving process, through our team of befrienders, etc. So don't suffer in silence.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think secondly, maybe if you're people who are trying to support people, I think it's acknowledging and recognizing the place that somebody is in, and that it's okay for them at times to be in that valley and be in that grief journey. That we don't need to rush them to the end, but walking alongside them is vitally important because they need friends, they need people who will listen,
and that is going to be painful. And one of the things we always try to emphasize is that the job of a supporter isn't an easy job, and we never want to minimize it, because actually it's really exhausting. It's almost never ending, because that person, once they've gone through loss, they will always be grieving. Not the same as in the aftermath. The valley time straight after a loss is the most consuming in those first months or year or so. After, it's going to get easier, but they're still going to be journeying forever. So when you jump in as a supporter, it is a lifelong journey, and that can feel overwhelming, and it's okay to admit that. And it's okay to admit as a supporter that you need support. And for you to go to the people around you and say, I'm supporting somebody through a really heartbreaking loss at the moment. Can you support me so I can support them?
Wow, that's really important.
And so acknowledging that you need help as a supporter, very important. If you don't know how to support people, initially show up practically. That's our best advice in the aftermath of loss. People initially don't know what they need. So going to people and saying, just tell me what you need, I'll be there. They often don't know which way is up in the aftermath of loss. And so asking them that, you're probably not going to be called upon for support. So the best thing you can do as a family, friend, church leader is practically show up by arranging meals for people, a cleaning rota. If they've got children, offering play dates, etc., giving the people space to be able to process their grief and loss. And then the other tip I'd give is educate yourself on the grieving process. I've got many books that have got sections in it for supporters and friends and church leaders who want to become better at supporting their loved ones through loss. They list things not to say, they list the right things to say, they have lists of how to show up practically. Educating yourself will take away so much of the fear of saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And just learning of when words are needed, but just as importantly, when silence can be appreciated, when you can just show up and say, I can't fix this, but I can sit and hold the tissues. Sometimes that's enough. And people just need to feel empowered to know how to show up and when to show up. And in my books, I cover all of that.
Yeah, could I add a fourth point?
Okay, you may.
Because all Christian things have threes generally, so I'm going to add a fourth point in here.
Break the trend.
I think it's really important as well to understand that God gets grief.
Yeah.
God is not this removed entity out there that has no idea. It says in the Bible that he's a man accustomed with grief and sorrow. He knows it. Jesus, his son, died on the cross. Okay, God wept. God mourned for his son. He knows it. So he longs to draw near to the brokenhearted. And so I think that's a really important thing of actually knowing, as you draw near to God, God is desperate there to draw near to you in these times, and to walk alongside and to be there. And there's the footprints in the sand thing, those hardest times of life, there being that set of footprints, and God being, well, that's the time I was carrying you.
And when we're going through our darkest days of grief, we have never, ever felt closer to God.
Wow.
And so we have lived that. We know it to be true, that if you give him permission to show up in your life when you're hurting and grieving, he can truly do that. And we experience the loneliness and isolation of loss that everybody does. But from a faith perspective, our faith had never been stronger. And we love to share about that, because I think we hear a lot of people sharing about stories where they have felt very bereft of faith and everything, but actually that wasn't our journey.
Yeah.
We really did cling to God and felt him cling to us.
Amen. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. There's so much more to share. So I would encourage you, if you are coming to Spring Harvest this year, go and check out the seminar that Zoe and Andy are going to be delivering on site on Wednesday, both sites. If you're not currently coming to Spring Harvest, we'd love you to come. There's still plenty of space. Well, not plenty of space, but there is space. So do check out that, and you can go to the website springharvest.org to have a look at that. Zoe and Andy, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. I learn from you every time we have a conversation. And I can't wait to see you at Skegness and Minehead in about 5 weeks' time. Can you believe it? So thanks, everybody, and take care. Have a great day.